So now let's move to the end of the 1940s, and the next date on our journey through the evolution of the drum set and drumming is 1948. In our last segment, we talked about a style called bebop, and bebop was kind of a reaction against the big band music, where musicians, jazz musicians, wanted to take jazz and make it much more of an art form that wasn't about dance music. It was more about really exploring the outer edges and the boundaries of what you could do with jazz music. So that was cool, but it didn't really appeal to the average person that still wanted to go out and go dancing on a Friday night. So the kind of music that evolved also from the big band era, but that kept the dance feel of the big bands, was this style called rhythm and blues. And it was also an African-American style like bebop. It evolved as something that African-American musicians did within their community for other African Americans who, by the way, had started to benefit after World War II and could now afford to buy their own records, their own style, and so became a demographic. So rhythm and blues starts to emerge. Now, rhythm and blues was similar to big band music in that you still had a horn section, although it was now a smaller horn section, and you still had this kind of danceable four-on-the-floor feel. Well, when people went out to dance on that Friday night, they still wanted to hear that big sound of the big band, but now the band was a lot smaller. And so you had to figure out ways to fill up the sound. So one of the ways they did this was the electric guitar, which started to really come into prominence in the 1940s, because now guitar player could turn up. By the end of the 40s, the electric bass shows up, so you could turn the bass up now. So for the first time ever, drummers could really start to lay in, and they could start to play heavier grooves. So the two things that drummers did in creating heavier grooves, first was to play a shuffle, okay? So the shuffle feel, that idea of, instead of just a ding, 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 which was kind of how jazz time feel had been prior to this time, well, now they could take that whole shuffle feel, the da, 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 and really start to express that in a much heavier way. And by the time we get to 1948 and this song Good Rockin' Tonight, the backbeat 2 and 4 really becomes accentuated. So you have this doom da 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 doom da 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 doom da 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 doom. Now today, when we sit down to play a groove, a lot of the times in many styles of music, popular music, whether it's rock or funk or hip hop or gospel or soul, country music, any of these styles, you automatically play a really heavy 2 and 4 on your snare drum, right? A backbeat. Well, believe it or not, that idea of a backbeat all the way through a song really didn't happen until 1948. And that's really the first time you start hearing, whether it's heavy hand claps or a backbeat, this song, Good Rockin' Tonight, is one of the first songs that has that heavy thing all the way through from start to finish. Now, prior to this time, it really would have been difficult for a drummer to play a backbeat from start to finish because technology was such that he would have drowned out all the other instruments. And we talked about that in an earlier segment in this series. But now, with the electric guitar, the electric bass, technology in the recording studio is better, you start to have some microphones for the other instruments, now a drummer can really lay in. And so Good Rockin' Tonight was one of the first tracks where this heavy backbeat idea with heavy hand claps going on 2 and 4, which came out of the gospel church, all comes together. And amazingly, it's a huge hit. In fact, this song stayed on the charts for 6 months. It was that popular. Big reason why was because of this heavy backbeat going, and guess what? People love to dance to it. So Good Rockin' Tonight, 1948, it's a major step forward for the groove in terms of rhythm and blues, shuffles, and backbeats. Our swing kit has now morphed into bebop-sized ride cymbal, and that size ride cymbal, once that took over, then they started using that in pretty much all styles of music, because they realized, well, now you had the option to play your hi-hat or you had the option to play on your ride cymbal as timekeepers. They were both valid. So we got our big time cymbal here, and we have kind of the beginnings of what was going to become a crash cymbal. You know, guys would use a couple different size rides, and then that eventually morphed into an official cymbal that was called a crash that was specifically to be crashed. So in rhythm and blues, of course, we said the shuffle is the bread and butter groove, and the shuffle is versus this kind of an idea, which was sort of the staple of the jazz, we call it the jazz ride pattern. Now, this was the more of the dominant idea in a rhythm and blues setting. Okay, so I'm going to play a short demonstration of shuffles, and I'm going to play first some shuffles without a backbeat, and then I'm going to add the backbeat, because remember we said the backbeat kind of came in at the very end of the 40s and into the 50s. So here we go. Now we're up to the year 1952, and this is an important year because it really coalesces the dawn of a new phenomenon, a new way of playing the drums, and that involves double bass. Now, many of us here in the 21st century think that the double bass phenomenon is like a new thing that goes along with music that's currently contemporary today, you know, heavy rock, metal. But actually, double bass has a really long and interesting history, and that history really can be attributed to the legendary drummer Louie Bellson. Now, Louie Bellson was a swing-era drummer. He was a big band drummer. Started his career in the late 1930s with the Benny Goodman Orchestra as a young man. He was the winner of the Gene Krupa drum contest. Remember we talked about Gene Krupa earlier. Krupa actually sponsored a nationwide drum contest. This is years and years before certain music stores sponsor their big nationwide drum-offs today. Same idea. You'd have, you know, regional contests, and then you'd have a winner who was the best drummer in the whole country. And the winner of the very first Gene Krupa drum contest was Louie Bellson. And Louie Bellson was a tinkerer. He's a fantastic drummer, but he thought, well, what if I brought a second bass drum into this thing? And already in high school, he has some diagrams that he actually showed me from woodshop, where he was designing the idea of a second bass drum. So when he became a professional, he started integrating a second bass drum into his setup. Double bass really made its first big splash when Louie Bellson joined Duke Ellington's orchestra in the early 50s. And he was also, in addition to being a great drummer, Louie was a prolific songwriter. And he wrote his own song called Skin Deep that's on the very famous Duke Ellington album, Ellington Uptown. And Skin Deep was a feature for the double bass drums. He also wrote another song called The Hawk Talks, which he also performed with Duke Ellington. And in both of these were really the first recordings where double bass could clearly be heard, where it was clearly featured, and it just exploded. And because of that, you have drummers in the 50s and into the 60s, all of whom who used double bass, and of course that led to the double bass style that we have today. Here's a short demonstration that sort of pays a little bit of tribute to one of my favorite drummers and favorite people, Louie Bellson. So far in this journey through the evolution of drum set and drumming and drum playing and cool things related to drums, we've talked about a lot of different things, everything from ragtime to early jazz to big band swing and rhythm and blues and bebop. But now we're moving into the 1950s, and the next date we're going to focus on is 1954, because we're moving into what's going to be a huge style that's going to be a game changer for everyone and lead us to where we are today, which is the style, of course, of rock and roll. Now, a lot of different things contributed to rock and roll. Rock and roll didn't just fall from the sky, fully formed the way we think of it today. It evolved out of all these other things we've talked about and kind of came together in some cool ways. So one of the key elements of rock and roll was a style called rockabilly. Okay, now maybe you've heard about rockabilly and you think, well, it's something to do with the South, I think, something to do with country music. Well, you're pretty close. Rockabilly was a style that evolved in the South, in places like Arkansas and Texas and Tennessee. And it was essentially taking country music, the style of country music, and adding drums and a more of a beefed up sound to it. So drums play a really key role in the evolution of rockabilly as a sound. Other styles like jazz or rhythm and blues had drums, since their inception. But country music was an acoustic form that had come from Europe originally, and they had resisted having drums. Drums, and the drum set especially, was not a part of the country sound. But as we get into the 1950s, so many other styles of popular music are using drums that the people in the country world start to say, okay, if we're going to stay current with our music, we need to start adding drums. So the drums start to show up in country music, and especially in this style called rockabilly. Now, rockabilly, kind of ground zero of where rockabilly happened, was a record label in Memphis, Tennessee called Sun Records. Some of the names that you may have heard of guys who got their start at Sun Records include Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, Roy Orbison recorded there. And these guys all headed to the Memphis area to get to they were all doing this cool rockabilly sound. So what was rockabilly? Well, the sound of rockabilly, a lot of it is driven not by the drums so much as by the bass. And a lot of times you hear clicking, kind of a chick, 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 chick going on rockabilly records, and a lot of people think that's actually the drums. Well, believe it or not, that is the sound of what we call the slap bass. This goes back a ways to the evolution of country before there was drums, and they used the bass to create the rhythm. So the bass would go tuk tuk tuk. They'd literally let the strings slap off the neck of the bass, and you get this very particular kind of sound. You also had what was called a dead string guitar, where they would take a dollar bill or some paper and weave it into the strings, and you'd literally hear chick, 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 just a dead sound, no chords, just a sound, a rhythmic sound. And so, the drums in a lot of the earliest rockabilly had to almost be quiet. They had to be played with brushes because, again, drums was a new thing in the world of country, and they were like, I don't know how much drums we really want here. We'll give you a little bit, but you got to, play brushes. So some of the biggest hits of early rockabilly sound, including Blue Suede Shoes, which was played by a drummer named W.S. Holland, he had to use brushes on that thing. But when you get that slap bass going, and you get the brushes going, and you get the chicka chicka chick of the dead string guitar all meshing together, and you put a little chicken picking guitar over the top of that, now you have a sound that's not quite rhythm and blues, not quite country, not quite rock and roll. It's kind of all of these things, and that's what's rockabilly.